Kyle was stopped in his tracks by a calm but intimidating voice. He heaved a sigh of relief, feeling safe in the vicinity despite the voice's sternness. Kyle was currently at the bottom of the mountain, with the recruitment site up ahead. He did not know the person guarding the gate, but those chasing him would certainly think twice before attempting to capture him here. The guard asked if Kyle was an applicant and noted that he was late. He stuttered as he produced the token he had kept safely inside his inner coat, which remained clean despite his dirty, soaked, and bruised appearance. The wooden token had stayed dry even after the rain last night. The guard examined the token and nodded, guessing what had happened to Kyle on the way to the site. He shifted his gaze to the long road behind the young man, sensing the presence of a few people likely chasing him. If Kyle failed to be recruited by any academy on site, those pursuers would welcome him with ill intentions. The guard reminded Kyle that only 4 academies remained open and wished him good luck as he allowed the young man to enter. Most academies did not care about the identities of their students. They focused on talent and suitability to their standards. Kyle would not have received the applicant's token if he were ordinary, and despite his pathetic appearance, there must be a story behind his condition. Kyle expressed his gratitude, and the guard waved him off, wanting him to leave quickly due to his unpleasant smell. Kyle was thankful, having expected difficulty because of his attire, which made him look like a beggar after running from. He had even prepared to offer his entire savings of 500 Zen to gain entry. Kyle looked up the stairs leading to the top of the mountain and composed himself. He was uncomfortable with his wet socks and coarse underwear, but did not mind, focusing instead on getting recruited today. It took Kyle more than 20 minutes to reach the top and enter the recruitment site, where he noticed few applicants remained. They were gathered in 3 different places. The site had 12 buildings representing the 12 academies in the region, but most had already. Kyle wondered why only 3 recruitment buildings had lines when there were supposed to be 4 academies left. He soon found the other open recruitment building with no line, a normal large house with black smoke coming from its chimney. The banner outside read Vermont Academy of Dark Arts. Kyle realized why no one was trying their luck there. Based on the memories of the original owner of his body, the dark arts had only become legal a decade ago after the Treaty of Keslor. Even though legal, the practice was not publicly acknowledged, and people still frowned upon those who trained in such ill-fated. Kyle had no plans to enroll there, and immediately went to see the other open recruitment sites: Lacrine, Academy of Summoning Arts; Doralt's, Academy of Mystic Arts; and Rakmith's, Academy of Elemental Arts. He smiled helplessly after seeing this. He had hoped to enroll in the Knights Academy, but was too late. His second option, the Academy of Alchemy Arts, had low requirements, but was already closed, possibly the first to reach its quota. Kyle recalled the chief telling him he had no talent except for his good physique, but decided to try anyway. He had no choice but to fall in line at one of the academies and hope to be recruited. He first went to Rakmith's Academy, one of the largest academies not only in the eastern region, but in the entire country. Unlike other academies focusing on one element, Rakmith's taught all kinds. It was the last day of recruitment, already 5 in the afternoon with recruitment lasting until 8. Kyle still had some time. While waiting in line, Kyle was not bothered by anyone, perhaps due to his attire or smell. Others looked at him condescendingly, which did not hurt him. While others chatted or made acquaintances, Kyle remained quiet, waiting for his turn. He cursed his terrible fate in his mind. He had been simply walking his dog to the park to meet some beautiful girls with cute dogs, a technique taught by a friend to meet new people. Unfortunately, before his plan bore fruit, he was stabbed by a fleeing robber after attempting to stop him. Kyle regretted meddling in others' affairs and showing off his manliness in front of those girls, but shook his head to erase the thoughts. There was no point dwelling on it now. He could only learn from his mistakes. He had transmigrated into a younger body with the same name, living in an alternate world resembling the Victorian era amid a vast industrial revolution. His father was a train operator on a steam-powered train in the city, and Kyle was aware of the era's situation, at least from the commoner's perspective. The only difference in this world was the existence of arcane studies. Although only a minority could learn them, it showed how different this place was compared to his previous Earth. Suddenly, Kyle heard the voice of the person guarding the recruitment building doors. It was finally his turn. The 20 or so people ahead of him had either remained inside or been sent out after failing. Upon entering, the facilitator waved his hand and washed away Kyle's filth with a water spell, confirming that his smell was truly unbearable. Kyle expressed his gratitude as he finally felt more comfortable. The middle-aged man with thick sideburns nodded and offered him a seat before explaining the test to determine if Kyle suited the academy. In this world, magic came from life itself. All living beings possessed magical energies, but only a select few could tap into them. Life had changed drastically due to these energies, and their limits were far from discovered. The facilitator said he would imbue his energy to trigger Kyle's hidden potential and instructed him not to resist but to accept it. Seeing Kyle ready, he began. He first checked Kyle's vitality and confirmed he had not learned any arcane studies. Then, he proceeded to use elemental energies, starting with water, the most common affinity for awakening potential. Unfortunately, there was no reaction even after 3 minutes. The facilitator then tried other elements. After almost 20 minutes, the middle-aged man frowned and declared he had wasted his time, telling Kyle he could leave. Kyle failed the first assessment, not even passing the most basic part, so there was no reason to continue with the other tests. He had already lowered his expectations, but was still disappointed by the man's words. Without pitying himself, Kyle proceeded to the other 2 recruitment sites. Unfortunately, the results were the same. He had no talent, failing the first assessment at each and being ridiculed by the facilitator at Lacrine Academy. In the end, Kyle Marshall found himself standing in front of the Dark Arts Academy. He considered this his last option since descending the mountain would almost certainly mean death. Kyle was about to walk inside when a voice called out from behind him. He turned to see a blond young man wearing an oversized coat who resembled one of those newspaper delivery guys in the city. The blond young man warned Kyle against enrolling there, explaining that the recruitment process was harsher than other academies and that failure was likely if he had not passed the remaining academies. Kyle bluntly asked why, but the blond young man simply advised him not to bother. Before the blond man could finish, Kyle entered the recruitment building without hesitation. He did so not because he wanted to die, but because failure to enroll today would guarantee his death. Inside, Kyle was greeted by a beautiful young woman who introduced herself as Leslie and said she would assist with his enrollment. He was surprised since he had expected an older, stronger-looking man to conduct the assessment. Kyle asked doubtfully if he would be enrolled immediately, recalling that assessments usually came first. Leslie explained that they had been watching him since he entered the site and that, even without talent, he could still learn the dark arts. Her words sparked hope in Kyle's eyes, and he eagerly asked if it was true. Leslie confirmed that enrollment was possible after completing the process, as their assessment method differed from others. Kyle was glad he had ignored the blond man's warning, realizing he might be talented in the dark arts. Kyle filled out the form and paid the admission fee of 1,000 Zen, though he owed 500 Zen and was allowed to make a promissory note to pay later. Leslie explained that the Vermont Academy treated new students well. She then told Kyle that to fully awaken his talent, he needed to drink a potion that would mark him as a student of the academy. Kyle accepted the black potion and drank it as instructed. He felt his body heating up, but soon blood began oozing from his orifices, and he experienced indescribable pain. He clutched his chest and looked at Leslie, realizing she had betrayed him. Though he wanted to strike her, he died. After Kyle's life force vanished, Leslie smiled bitterly and instructed a hooded man named Dex to collect the token and add Kyle's body to the 3rd chamber. Dex appeared silently, his lips stitched with black strings and his body covered in bruises and patches, yet he moved with the skill of an experienced laborer. Despite his unusual appearance, Dex was clean and emitted no foul smell. Leslie then recalled that Kyle had no elemental affinity or talent, so she doubted Wexer would consume his body. She ordered Dex to store the body in the mortuary for use as fuel or something similar. Dex paused but did not acknowledge her. Instead of going to the basement, he exited through the back door where an airship awaited. The Academy's recruitment buildings all had airships to transport enrollees to the Academy grounds. Leslie remained in the recruitment building for another hour before shaking her head in frustration. After a week, she had only recruited 2 students for the academic year. She muttered that it was no wonder no one wanted the mission, as recruiting 5 people in the region was impossible. She had hoped to earn easy contribution points, but found the local people pathetic. After scanning the area one last time, Leslie left the recruitment site, heading back to the academy with the 2 new students and the corpses she had collected. Kyle's body was placed in a cold storage room filled with other dead bodies. He did not know how much time had passed before regaining consciousness, feeling suffocated and awkwardly positioned. He could not see anything in the darkness but sensed the coldness and the stiff corpses piled around him. He managed to free himself from the pile and breathe properly, feeling cold and hungry but grateful to be alive. Suddenly, panels appeared before him displaying messages like notifications from a game. The first congratulated him on activating the divine extraction system, which allowed him to extract and obtain mystical properties of the world. Another panel informed him that he had died, that his soul did not belong in this world, and that it had been rejected. The system was restarting his life, allowing him to come back from the dead, but he had to use it. Kyle was dumbfounded by the rejection message and rubbed his eyes, realizing the panels were not illusions. More notifications appeared, including one asking if he wanted to extract a human corpse. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, revealing the cold room filled with bodies, one of which wore a glowing necklace that provided faint light. Kyle hesitated to respond, unsure what extracting meant, whether it involved bodily fluids or something else. He shuddered at the thought, but recalled the first message about obtaining mystical properties. He wondered if using the system would allow him to belong to the world and face death properly in the future. Kyle muttered to himself, questioning his location, and noting that the bodies around him were similar in age and had died in a similar manner, with blood oozing from their orifices. Surprisingly, he did not feel nervous or shocked by the dead, a stark contrast to his past life when he could not even look at his uncle's casket. He wondered if the potion had affected his feelings. Connecting the dots, Kyle realized they had been thrown into the cold storage room and would likely be sent to the crematorium or worse, used as cadavers by. He believed the suspicious academy that killed applicants must have some use for dead bodies beyond burial. The sound of thuds echoed in the room. Suddenly, Kyle Marshall heard the sound of turning gears and felt that their room was ascending. He noticed this and his eyes lit up, realizing that he was really inside the academy's airship. Kyle Marshall felt dizzy for a moment because of the rocky movement of the airship. He waited until the airship finally stabilized and then realized that he had received several more notifications from his system. Kyle Marshall saw a message indicating that a human corpse had been discovered and asked if he would like to extract it. He understood that touching the dead bodies allowed him to extract something from them. Kyle Marshall ignored the message again as he sat down on the cold floor. He did not feel comfortable sitting on the dead body, but had to endure it. Kyle Marshall recalled that he did not expect to be boarding an airship like this as memories fused in his soul. He was only 13 years old and had previously earned money by helping his father's friend, a watchmaker working in the alleys of Melthorn City. Kyle Marshall remembered that the watchmaker had a son whom he wanted to send to one of the arcane academies, but the son got caught in an accident and his dream could no longer be achieved. Kyle Marshall ended up being the receiver of the old man's inheritance, which included not only the applicant's token, but also an expensive pocket watch that caught the eyes. A few days ago, when Kyle Marshall was planning to visit the old man in the alley before going to the recruitment site, he saw the old man being beaten by a group of people. They were looking for the watch, and Kyle Marshall wanted to return it to save the old man, but the latter warned him not to give it. In the end, the old man was killed, and the robbers were also planning to kill Kyle Marshall. Whether he surrendered the pocket watch or not, he knew that he would be killed by these people. Kyle Marshall sighed after recalling this event as he inspected his body. The token was already gone, but the pocket watch was still there. He pressed the button of the spherical watch, and its gold-plated cover opened up, revealing the burned device. Kyle Marshall knew it was already broken. However, it was definitely working fine when it was first given to him, according to the memories of this body. He did not know when it turned like this, but he had noticed what happened to the device when he was running for his life. He previously thought of using it as a weapon, so he checked it while running. Kyle Marshall wondered if this was related to his transmigration, believing that there should be a reason for coming here. Perhaps this broken pocket watch was the medium he used to enter the boy's body. He helplessly smiled as he touched the corpse beside him. The system again notified him that a human corpse had been discovered and asked if he would like to extract it. Kyle Marshall thought there was no point waiting for the unknown. Instead of feeling safe and secure that he would not die even if he was weak, it was better to get stronger and perhaps enjoy his life, even if it was not going. Kyle Marshall decided to start using his system. In any case, he had quite a lot of corpses to extract here, so he should obtain a lot of mystical energies or whatever from them. He would worry about his next action once he got out of this room. He then took a deep breath before answering the system's question affirmatively. In an instant, he received feedback from the system indicating that the extraction was successful, granting him energy and a slight increase in intelligence. Kyle Marshall was unsure what to feel after seeing the result, as he did not. Kyle Marshall received another notification as soon as he thought of this. It seemed that after using the system, its corresponding functions started activating as well. The system displayed his name, attributes including strength, agility, intelligence, vitality, and available energy. Kyle Marshall stared at the new panel he was seeing. He could easily guess what those attributes stood for, but had no clue about the energy points that he had obtained. Based on how it was separated and how it said available on it, he felt like it was a usable point or some form of currency. He was not sure. Kyle Marshall knew that despite not knowing what it really was, the higher the number, the better, similar to his attribute points. He looked at his surroundings again and confirmed that there should be 20 or so bodies around him. Kyle Marshall thought that since these guys died from the potion as well, they were probably not as talented as he was. He decided to start with his extraction, not expecting too much since these people were weak like him. The system again notified him that a human corpse had been discovered and asked if he would like to extract it. Kyle Marshall answered yes. Kyle Marshall continued extracting energy and attributes from the corpses, mostly gaining intelligence with occasional increases in strength and agility. For some unknown reason, he was mostly getting intelligence attributes, and no vitality attributes at all. It seemed that there was some rule that he was not aware of yet. Kyle Marshall stopped for a moment as he felt the changes happening to his body. It was not much with 1 or 2 extractions, but 20 of them was quite a huge sum. Kyle Marshall extracted a total of 21 dead bodies. There was only 1 more left, and after resting for a while, he decided to continue. He picked this corpse last since he felt something different about it. He was not sure if it was because of his heightened intelligence or if he was just imagining things. The system again notified him that a human corpse had been discovered and asked if he would like to extract it. Kyle Marshall answered yes. Kyle Marshall found that this man was quite different from the rest. The one he extracted this time was the guy who had a glowing necklace, which was giving him some light in the dark and cold room. After extracting the points in his body, Kyle Marshall bent down to take the necklace. He muttered that he would take care of it as he helped himself to take the necklace. The necklace looked simple with only a rough black thread, perhaps made of a few strands of nylon, but its pendant was quite interesting. It was a creamy pearl that was not even a perfect sphere and was tied clumsily on the black thread. Kyle Marshall noticed that it was still dimly glowing in the dark, which had helped him quite a lot. He inspected it for a while, but could not tell the reason why it was glowing. He decided to just wear it on himself. It felt refreshing to him and also seemed to improve his vision in the darkness. It was a magical experience. Kyle Marshall wondered if the system did not get triggered because it was not a corpse, or there were not enough mystical properties on this. After not getting any results in his inspection, he decided to check his attributes to confirm the improvements in his body. Kyle Marshall saw that his attributes had improved slightly, with a notable increase in intelligence. He muttered that the improvement was not much, but wondered about the +1 in his intelligence attribute. Of the 22 corpses, 14 had given him intelligence attributes, 3 had given agility, and the last 5 had provided strength attributes. All of them were only 0.01 points, except for the last one that gave him 0.05 points. Kyle Marshall pondered for a moment before removing his necklace and placing it on the floor. Kyle Marshall confirmed that the refreshing sensation disappeared together with the +1 points in his intelligence. With this experiment, he confirmed that the necklace he was wearing was a mystical tool. He frowned after recalling that even this guy did not survive drinking that potion. He wondered what the potion was and why it was so deadly. It was unfortunate that aside from the attributes, he could not tell anything else that had changed inside his body. Suddenly, Kyle Marshall's stomach rumbled as he had not eaten yet. The last decent food he had eaten was the boiled sweet potato he bought at the market. It was delicious when freshly boiled, and he could not help but swallow his saliva after recalling it. The next things he ate while running from the robbers were leaves and moss. He found several mushrooms at that time, but since he had zero knowledge about them, he did not dare to eat them as it might cost him his life. He was lucky that it was raining, so he was able to drink plenty of water at the very least. Kyle Marshall gritted his teeth as he decided to check all the belongings of the corpses around him. He muttered an apology as he prepared to search through them. After several minutes, Kyle noticed that all of them were missing their applicants' tokens, allowing him to guess that Leslie had taken them all. He found several Zen notes and coins, though he had not counted them yet. It should be more than 1,000 Zen. Kyle also discovered some food, including a couple of hard and already bitten granola bars in one of the... He found it difficult to eat, but at least it put something in his stomach. Kyle could not complain at the moment. After having a few bites, he adjusted his breath and covered himself with a few more jackets. The room, or perhaps the mortuary, was really cold. Even with his increased strength, it did not help at all. Kyle tried to conserve his energy as much as possible since once they landed, someone would certainly open the door and discover him. He had no idea what was going to happen to him, but knew he needed energy for that. Kyle looked at the tightly sealed iron door before scanning the entire room with the help of the dimly glowing necklace. He confirmed that aside from the tiny ventilators in the ceiling, there was nothing in the room that could help him see the situation outside. Kyle remained in his position for several hours until he fell asleep. The moment he woke up, he had no idea how much time had passed. Without anything to do, he fell asleep once more, and when he woke up again, he was already feeling warm. Kyle thought it was warm and wondered what had happened. He was not able to immediately open his eyes since everything was bright. Kyle guessed that while he was sleeping, he had arrived at the destination of the airship and was now being transported somewhere. He adjusted his body to a more comfortable position before slowly opening his eyes. It was already morning, and Kyle realized that he was being moved using a cart together with a pile of dead bodies. There were 7 or 8 bodies in each of the 3 carts. Kyle wondered if they had not noticed that he had several coats covering his body, and that he was breathing before they carried him out. His eyes widened as he realized that the one pulling the cart behind him appeared like a zombie. No, it appeared like a human that was patched together. There were stitches everywhere, and the color of the skin differed in every patch. Suddenly, their eyes met. Kyle held his breath and did not make a sound. He felt truly frightened and unsure of what to do in front of this abomination. Kyle thought not to be eaten, but realized that the being had a stitched mouth. It meant that he would not likely be bitten by them. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, Kyle realized that the being was no longer looking at him. The abomination continued working as if it did not see Kyle moving. Kyle heaved a sigh of relief as he looked at the being once more. He knew that there were mystical things in this world, but did not expect it to be like this. Kyle thought it looked disgusting and understood why dark arts were not welcome in society. After a while, Kyle found himself being taken to what seemed like a factory. Black smoke was coming out of its 6 chimneys, and he could hear the sound of steel being hammered even from the outside. The smoke also started getting thick as he neared the factory. Kyle could barely see the blue sky and could not help but remember his days in the streets of Melthorn City. He somehow missed that city. Although he only fused with the memories of the previous Kyle, he still felt like they were his own memories. Kyle shook his head to clear his mind as he looked around his surroundings. Aside from the factory they were heading to, he was able to see the middle-sized airship from which he came. It was docked at a nearby dockyard together with 3 more airships of the same size that were being painted and repaired. Kyle could see the logo of the Vermont Academy on this airship, so he could not be mistaken. He could tell that it was a middle-sized airship since he had already seen a large one passing above Melthorn City before. Its size was comparable to a castle. If he compared it to the one he was seeing now, he could tell that it was not even half the size of the large airship. Kyle then shifted his gaze to the other side and confirmed that there was a huge fortress, or perhaps a castle that should be the academy itself. He wondered what was going to happen to him as he headed towards the factory outside the castle. Perhaps because of the smoke being produced, the factory was built quite far away from the academy where students should be studying. Not too far from this factory was a row of residential buildings that also seemed abandoned because it was so big, but Kyle could not. It felt desolate. Of course, he might be mistaken because of the angle from which he was viewing the area, and because of the noise coming from the factory that was messing with his mind. Kyle considered jumping out of the cart, but the road ahead felt ominous. He had not seen any people aside from the laborers in the dockyard. The only sound he was hearing was the hammering of steel and the smoke belching out of the chimney of the factory. Suddenly, the 3 carts separated. One of them headed to a small gate going to the eastern side of the Academy Castle, and another went to the residential area. As for Kyle's cart, it was still headed to the factory. He suddenly heard someone's footsteps and could not help but hold his breath. He was not sure whether he was in trouble right now, so he had no idea how to handle the situation. Kyle glanced ahead and realized that a bulky middle-aged man together with a teenager who seemed to be laborers at the factory was looking at the cart he was in. They did not stare too much, perhaps because they were also uncomfortable in front. Since Kyle was unmoving, they did not notice that he was actually alive. Kyle then heard the teenager speak in a soft voice as they passed by, wondering if they were students of the academy who died outside since they all looked younger than him. Hearing this, the middle-aged man shook his head and answered that it was another batch who failed the assessment of the academy. He reminded the teenager about the black potion they had seen before. Kyle recalled that the man told the teenager not to even touch it. The middle-aged man explained that it was the darkness possession potion, and that one would end up like this if curiosity got the best of them. He then urged the teenager to continue walking ahead. They only had half an hour to take a break and could not waste their time there. Kyle somehow felt that it was his chance to get away. Those 2 guys were definitely normal people. Perhaps they could help him in his situation and leave this place. He looked at the zombie, or whatever abomination it was, and prepared to jump out. Kyle moved the hands and feet that were covering him to adjust his position. However, at this time he heard a voice close to him. A man wearing a faded brown coat and tight trousers was already watching him and talking to himself. He seemed so mysterious since Kyle did not sense his presence until he had spoken. Kyle thought no. At this moment his vision was locked onto a pair of eyes that were crystal clear like sapphire. It felt like his mind was being muddled. He had to think of something. The zombie had already stopped pulling the cart as soon as this unknown person arrived, and Kyle had no idea what was going to happen to him. Nervously he said hello. The mysterious person said he could feel that the darkness possession was completed in Kyle's body. He noted that Kyle had a weak life force, but could definitely be accepted even in his current state. The man then touched his beard for a moment as if considering what to do. In the end, Kyle was not even able to introduce himself, and the man did not ask any questions. He just ordered the zombie laborers. It would be a problem for Leslie if Kyle joined the ceremony. The man instructed them to bring Kyle to Mr. Heinz, Who would know what to do? Kyle was confused about what was going on and wanted to say something in reply. However, he was stunned by a sudden magical scene happening in front of his eyes. The mysterious man who was previously scratching his beard suddenly summoned a cane and tapped the ground. With a thud, a strand of Kyle's shadow suddenly extended and went to the tip of the cane before returning to normal. It did not hurt him, but Kyle felt quite uncomfortable seeing a part of his shadow had gone to the cane. The man said it was a normal procedure as he revealed a smile showing his perfect white teeth before disappearing into nothingness. As soon as the man disappeared, Kyle realized that he could no longer remember the man's face. He found his facial features, skin tone, hair, and even his voice to be blurry. Kyle felt as if the man was shrouded by a shadow and could only recall the smile with the perfect white teeth that he had revealed before vanishing. Kyle uttered a silent question, overwhelmed by a wave of tumultuous emotions rising in his heart. He had even forgotten how he had arrived inside the factory and was greeted by a bunch of curious people working there. The workers treated him like a rare animal being paraded in front of many spectators. One of the laborers wondered aloud why the man seemed alive. Another speculated that he had mistaken the cart for a wagon and decided to take a ride. A third joked that the man was probably looking for a female's body and had chosen a cold one out of desperation. The fourth retorted that the previous comment was self-directed. These laborers appeared to be melting or hammering steel near several large furnaces, making the temperature unbearably high. They numbered about 50, as some seemed to have taken a break. Kyle's strange situation did not escape their notice, and they immediately made fun of him as a form of entertainment in their bleak lives. Kyle jolted awake upon hearing their words and urged himself to jump out of the moving cart, desperate to leave. He was not only scared but also embarrassed. However, he felt a mysterious force beckoning him to stay on it. Kyle wondered what was happening. He experienced another magical sensation as he remained on the cart until it arrived at its destination. The cart brought him deep inside the factory, passing through 6 doors before the sound of steel being hammered ceased. The room, or perhaps laboratory, was massive. From the bright yellow light cast by the chandelier, Kyle could see the room's layout. Rows of shelves filled with glass jars lined the space, each jar containing something preserved in blue or red liquid. At the far right corner were shelves filled with books, while the left corner was blocked by a few more shelves. The central area held a couple of workbenches cluttered with devices he could not understand. Nevertheless, he noticed familiar apparatuses or instruments typically used for scientific experiments. Near the entrance stood an elevated platform with a sofa and a wooden table, likely used as a resting area. Kyle suddenly thought that this must be a laboratory and feared what might happen to him. The cart finally stopped with a thud. This time, Kyle felt the restrictions binding him disappear and realized he could move out of the cart. However, he noticed that the zombie started moving again, causing him to freeze immediately. He did not know how to deal with the creature. Suddenly, the cart was lifted and dropped, causing 7 bodies, including Kyle, to fall to the floor. Kyle cried out as the sudden drop caught him off guard, landing in an awkward position. The bodies on top of him were heavy, adding to his pain. The zombie creaked as it continued pulling the cart and exited the laboratory without any reaction, leaving Kyle astounded. Kyle pushed the bodies off and extracted himself from the pile, sweating from the effort. He finally had the chance to see the man who was looking at him curiously. Ignoring the pain in his body, Kyle cautiously observed the man. The person was old, with a wrinkled face and balding white hair. Nevertheless, he looked somewhat professional in his laboratory coat and goggles, holding a quill while seated behind a desk. Kyle had only noticed him now because the zombie had previously blocked his view. The old man spoke with a surprised and amused voice, apparently expecting the delivery of corpses, but not a living one. Kyle sensed no hostility and decided he could handle the situation. He took a deep breath to gain courage and replied that there seemed to be a mistake, mentioning that someone had noticed it and that Mr. Heinz would take care of it. He introduced himself as Kyle. Mr. Heinz confirmed his name and asked if Kyle could remember the face of the person he had met before. He put down the quill and clasped his hands, appearing to enjoy the conversation and stopping his work altogether. Kyle was able to stand but stayed near the pile of corpses. He apologized for not remembering the man's face after he disappeared, but added that he could recall his perfect teeth. The old man's mouth twitched as he seemed to understand the situation and nodded. He revealed that the man was the vice headmaster, explaining the mystery. The room fell silent and Kyle was unsure how to respond, as he was more interested in knowing the old man's plans for him. After a moment's thought, Kyle cautiously asked Mr. Heinz what would happen to him and whether he would be turned into a zombie like the one that brought him there. Mr. Heinz raised his brows at the question. He explained that the creature was not a zombie, but a living being, not undead. He clarified that zombies came from necromancy, while the creature was a variant, a product of Dark Alchemy from a different branch. He wondered aloud why he was even explaining this to Kyle. The old man suggested that the vice headmaster probably wanted him to accept Kyle as his student. He shared that he had been in a similar situation before, as the dark possession took a long time to show its effects due to his unique physique. He suspected Kyle was the same. Mr. Heinz spoke softly, looking at Kyle's body as he recalled his past experience. Kyle's eyes widened upon hearing the old man's words, feeling delighted to have a predecessor despite their differences. It meant he had a chance to continue living. Excited, Kyle asked the senior more questions. Heinz faintly smiled and nodded. He revealed that it had been about 53 years since he met his master. Kyle was surprised and inwardly questioned whether Mr. Heinz should be retired by now, especially since dark arts had only been legalized 10 years ago. He wondered if he would end up like him and began to worry. Although being alive was good, he feared this might become a prison. Mr. Heinz seemed to read his thoughts and calmly explained that his master's mission was to develop a new branch of dark arts. 5 decades ago, all practitioners of dark arts were suppressed by other arcane paths. They had no place like this and were all in hiding, trying to survive. As Mr. Heinz recollected his chaotic and war-filled past, Kyle's stomach began to grumble again. Previously nervous and focused on survival, Kyle had encountered a scary variant, the mysterious vice headmaster who took part of his shadow and feared becoming an experimental subject after surviving despite being pronounced dead. Now that he felt his life was spared, his stomach reminded him that he was starving. Mr. Heinz noticed the empty plate on his desk, confirming he had no food to offer the young man. He advised Kyle to endure for now and asked his age. Embarrassed, Kyle meekly replied that he was 13 years old and would turn 14 on September 10th. According to the memories fused with him, arcane academies accepted students aged 13 to 16 and typically graduated them after 10 years with a stable income. This opportunity had attracted the previous Kyle, who immediately accepted it once the old watchmaker showed it to him. Furthermore, the Academy of Knights, which Kyle originally wanted to attend, could be completed in 6 years, with the remaining 4 years spent experiencing the world before becoming an official knight. The old watchmaker had also informed him that graduates of that academy earned 10 times more than those in security companies or mercenary squads. This prospect was enticing to Kyle. Heinz knew that Kyle's father would have difficulty sending him to a secondary school or college, so he understood that attending one of the arcane academies was necessary since the academy could cover Kyle's daily expenses. He also knew from the old watchmaker that there were ways to earn money within the academy. Heinz was aware that although Kyle's father earned 40 Zen weekly, he was currently repaying a debt due to being scammed by a former coworker, leaving him with only 20 Zen per week, barely enough for rent and living expenses. Heinz realized that without the old watchmaker's help, Kyle would not have had the money to pay half of the admission fee. Heinz thought for a moment, tapping the desk before asking Kyle if he knew the facilitator who made him drink the potion. Kyle blinked at the sudden question and recalled the woman named Leslie. He was infuriated with Leslie, who had looked at him coldly and unconcerned while he was in pain and dying, though he acknowledged she was probably just doing her job. Kyle could not blame her entirely since he wanted to enter the Vermont Academy, but he considered filing a complaint about their deadly admission exam. He gritted his teeth, feeling tricked by Leslie into believing the potion was normal and safe, as she had claimed it would only awaken his talent and make him a talented student by the time they arrived at the academy. Kyle knew he had no hidden talent and thought Leslie should have been honest about the dangers. He realized that if he were not a transmigrator with a system, he would have surely died. Heinz noticed Kyle's anger and smiled faintly, guessing what had happened. He explained that since Leslie was involved, it was not good for Kyle to join this year's batch. Instead, he could work at the laboratory for a year until Leslie graduated, allowing him to attend the academy. Heinz offered to teach Kyle during that time. Kyle was confused, but did not dislike the idea of learning from Heinz, who seemed like a decent senior. He wondered why Leslie was so special and how old she really was, given that she was also graduating this year. Kyle agreed to Heinz's arrangement, but asked why he needed to be careful of Leslie, questioning if the academy would not protect him, and why Leslie would want to deal with him since he had not offended her. Internally, Kyle thought that Leslie should be hiding from him after lying to him. Heinz did not mind Kyle's questions and answered with a bitter laugh, revealing that Leslie had a deep background and was an outstanding student in the Dark Alchemy department. He explained that Kyle's unique physique made him a good subject for her experiments, as she might try to advance her tier. Kyle asked about his participation and followed Heinz's gesture to sit on the sofa, closing his eyes briefly to ignore his hunger. Heinz continued explaining that the first tier of variants, which had brought Kyle here, were useful laborers, but ineffective in combat due to their slowness and stiffness. The second tier was decent, but not strong or cost-effective enough. Heinz described the third tier as strong and terrifying, capable of defeating first-class practitioners of elemental arts, but the method to create them had been lost, requiring a specific, unknown physique. Kyle shuddered, realizing that Leslie might consider him suitable for advancing her research. Heinz confirmed this and added that Leslie had an excellent memory and some influence over the Academy, allowing her to make things difficult for Kyle, potentially forcing him to leave or disappear. If lucky, Kyle might reappear as a Tier 3 variant. If unlucky, he would be lifeless. Kyle understood the situation and nodded, deciding not to clash with Leslie due to her deep connections. He promptly asked Heinz to let him stay and shamelessly called him Master. Kyle knew he needed time to develop safely with his divine extraction system and that waiting a year until Leslie graduated was acceptable. He also looked forward to learning from an experienced master with a special position in the Academy. Kyle found it strange that Heinz's laboratory was inside a steel factory away from the Academy, but assumed there was a story behind it that he would learn over time. He was curious about the term first-class practitioner, which he had never encountered before, but he knew it was not the right time to ask. He mused that it would be better to compare their strength to a police field revolver. Heinz smiled at the polite and decisive young man, feeling that his laboratory would be lively again. He did not dislike having an apprentice, knowing he was old and wanting to pass down his knowledge and legacy. Heinz tapped the desk, satisfied with the development, and brooded about being close to a breakthrough in his research. Even if his health prevented him from completing it, someone would continue it, creating a new branch of the dark arts. A hint of madness briefly flickered in his eyes, unnoticed by Kyle, who was busy suppressing his hunger. After a while, Heinz decided to feed Kyle. He left the corpses on the floor and called another variant in the factory to bring a meal consisting of roasted mutton and lemonade from workers' leftovers. Kyle found the meal fulfilling after many days and looked gratefully at Heinz. Heinz then allowed Kyle to use the bathroom to clean himself and gave him a trench coat to cover himself. He informed Kyle about a nearby market where he could spend some money on new clothes and offered to show him to his room. Suddenly, Heinz mentioned another delivery and asked Kyle to help him. Kyle had just finished cleaning and was eager to learn more from Heinz, reluctant to leave the factory without understanding the situation outside. He knew he had to be careful in the Academy of Dark Arts' territory, wary of strange individuals who might take parts of his shadow again. The door creaked open as a variant delivered another batch of corpses. Kyle asked Heinz where the corpses came from, noting their unfamiliar appearance and clothing. Heinz replied that they came from another recruitment site and expressed disbelief that Kyle thought the place he was recruited was the only site. Kyle was stunned, but nodded in understanding and thanked Heinz for clarifying. He then cautiously asked what they would do with the corpses, suppressing his uneasiness. Kyle was curious about their purpose, knowing that this fate would have been his if his soul had not been rejected by the underworld. Heinz answered without a trace of emotion that they would use the bodies as fuel. He explained that in Dark Alchemy, a human body could serve as effective fuel, especially with the help of the quince furnace. Heinz paused before sighing and admitted that there were many things Kyle did not know. He confessed that he was not a good teacher and suggested that Kyle read the basics first, asking if he knew how to read as he walked toward the mini-library inside the laboratory. Kyle wryly smiled, acknowledging his lack of general knowledge about the arcane paths, the dark arts, the Vermont Academy, and other mystical subjects. He had only completed his primary education after all. Kyle felt fortunate that Heinz had plenty of books to help him gain knowledge about the other side of society and considered himself lucky to have such a mentor. Kyle replied that he could read Swanetti without problems and knew a little Humish, as he had thought he would study at the Academy of Knights. He recalled that Swanetti was the common language of the Milton Kingdom and the Palom Empire, though he was unsure about the history between the two nations. Kyle remembered hearing from his primary teachers that the Palom Empire had a deep connection to the Milton Kingdom. He also knew that Melthorn City was located in the Milton Kingdom. Heinz said that was good enough and that he would pick a few books for Kyle to finish reading within a month. Kyle immediately felt a headache at the thought. He wondered just how many books he would have to read in 2 months. Soon he saw Heinz in front of the bookshelf on the leftmost side of the room, taking out over 8 books and placing them on his desk. Kyle thought that 8 books should be doable as he approached Heinz. Heinz told Kyle not to read those books because they were too advanced and pointed to the remaining books on the shelf. Kyle was astounded, feeling that the task was too much. He looked at Heinz again and confirmed that his face showed no sign of joking. Kyle stammered that the pile probably contained over 100 books. He doubted he could finish even 1 book per day, knowing he was not a machine and that his system did not help him read faster. He was unsure if his intelligence was sufficient to make the task easier. Heinz responded nonchalantly that it did not matter, and told Kyle to read what he could. He explained that after about a week he would teach Kyle something to help him absorb information faster, but first needed to confirm a few things with the vice headmaster before teaching any dark arts. Kyle finally relaxed, realizing that Heinz had already thought things through and that he only needed to follow his instructions. Kyle expressed understanding and offered to help arrange the corpses that had been delivered. He asked where Heinz wanted him to put them as he approached the bodies. Kyle noticed that the deceased still had coins bulging in their pockets, similar to Leslie, the facilitator at another recruitment site, who did not seem interested in the commoners' belongings. Heinz thought for a moment before accepting Kyle's assistance. Heinz instructed Kyle to line up the bodies and remove all their clothes for inspection. He warned that if nothing was wrong, the bodies should be brought behind a certain door, but added that he would take them away himself because Kyle would probably die if he got near the furnace. Kyle was stumped by the sudden instruction but decided not to question his master and to follow the orders. He was also not interested in the dangerous furnace that could kill him. Kyle took a deep breath to steady himself, admitting that he was uncomfortable looking at the dead bodies. He had been bothered by them all along, but could not complain in front of the old expert. The room was bright, allowing him to see the expressions on the corpses' faces clearly. Open eyes, dry blood on their orifices, and expressions of fear, pain, and despair. None of them had died peacefully. Kyle felt less afraid than when he had been in a cold, dark room where he could not see their faces properly. Kyle forcefully told Heinz that he would begin working on the bodies and started with the first batch. Among them were 3 female bodies, but Kyle did not stop moving even for a moment. It was a bit difficult because their clothes were tighter than expected. The bodies were still quite cold, and perhaps due to a potion, they had not made a mess after death. Kyle recalled from his past life that muscles usually loosen after death, releasing strain on the bowels. However, this had not happened with these bodies, possibly because of the potion they had consumed, though he could not be sure. After removing all their clothes, Kyle took the time to close their eyes and rigid jaws. Then he turned to the new batch of corpses that had been delivered. He looked at Heinz, who seemed to be preparing to go out, before shifting his gaze back to the bodies. Kyle steeled himself and decided to try extracting from the corpses. Kyle successfully discovered a human corpse and chose to extract from it. The extraction was successful, granting him a small increase in energy and intelligence. He checked Heinz's reaction and confirmed that the master had not noticed anything. Kyle felt relieved that the extraction was untraceable. He proceeded to extract from the other 7 bodies as he removed their clothes and lined them up. Each extraction was successful, granting small increases in various attributes such as energy, intelligence, strength, and agility. Seeing his attributes slowly increase, Kyle smiled, thinking it might be a good idea to stay there. As he happily checked his attributes, Heinz suddenly expressed delight upon seeing Kyle's work. Heinz remarked that it was the first time he had seen someone smile while dealing with corpses, and suggested that Kyle was fated to work there. Kyle's heart skipped a beat at Heinz's words, but he awkwardly laughed. He quickly found a reason to speak, noting that the corpses still had money in their pockets and asking if he could take it. He tapped one of the dead bodies' pockets, producing the sound of coins, which stunned Heinz for a moment. Heinz laughed and told Kyle to take whatever he wanted from the bodies, explaining that all their belongings would be tossed into a different furnace anyway. Heinz seemed satisfied that his student did not mind stealing from the dead. Although Heinz had not yet taught Kyle the principles of the dark arts, he felt that Kyle was well suited to learn them. Heinz then put on his coat, checked the time with his silver pocket watch, and found his cane beside his desk before looking at Kyle's work. Kyle had finished undressing all the corpses and collecting their money. He set aside their dirty and bloodied clothes and looked at Heinz, curious about what kind of inspection he would perform this time. Heinz walked around the bodies with his cane, carefully checking each one. He seemed to be searching for something, but Kyle had no idea what. He stood to the side and waited for Heinz to finish his inspection. After a while, Kyle decided to check his attributes panel. His name was displayed as Kyle Marshall. His attributes showed slight increases. Strength at 0.70, agility at 0.95, intelligence at 0.96 plus 1, and vitality at 0.52. He had 150 available energy. Of the 8 corpses, 5 had granted intelligence, 2 had granted strength, and 1 had granted agility. 2 of the intelligence extractions had given 0.02 points. Kyle did not mind the low extraction numbers, considering the corpses were normal humans who had not learned any arcane path. They were just teenagers like him with pathetic attributes. He felt confident that extracting from those who had truly dabbled in the arcane path would yield better results. For now, he had no idea where to find such corpses, but was not in a hurry, knowing patience was necessary. Suddenly, as Kyle planned to count the money he had collected, he noticed the surroundings growing dark. The light from the chandelier appeared to be covered by a thin veil of darkness, and the shadows began to move. The room grew colder, and Kyle realized that this was not a natural phenomenon. Kyle looked at his master only to see him whispering something. He could not understand what the old man was saying, but somehow grasped the situation. Kyle shivered at the thought of a ritual as he stood rooted to his spot. The young man witnessed a phenomenon fitting the dark arts occurring before him. The corpses suddenly opened their eyes. Kyle almost jumped up in surprise, not expecting such a sight. He immediately stepped back, feeling seriously creeped out and wishing to leave the laboratory. Kyle gritted his teeth as he watched everything unfold. The old man truly lived up to his reputation as an expert in the dark arts as the corpses began trembling. The frightened young man realized the corpses were planning to stand up. The stiff joints of the corpses started popping as they slowly rose in unison. Then, they appeared to receive a similar order and began walking toward the door on the opposite side, where the quince furnace was located. It did not take long for the walking dead to reach the room. Kyle smiled ruefully, imagining the naked corpses jumping one by one into the furnace to be incinerated. Mr. Heinz suddenly interrupted Kyle's thoughts by speaking. The surrounding darkness retreated, and everything returned to normal. Kyle was not interested in the walking dead at all, finding them creepy and not cool. He wondered if there were any normal dark arts, but only smiled at his master and responded. Kyle admitted it was the first time he had seen something like that, and confessed he had thought the old man had revived the dead. Mr. Heinz laughed and explained there was no such thing as reviving the dead or resurrection. He clarified that even the necromancy branch could only create undead. The old man added that he did not normally use this technique to bring them to the furnace, but wanted to show Kyle what kind of arts he would be learning in the future. Kyle acknowledged this and praised Master Heinz as incredible. Although he had not learned the technique yet, Kyle was sure that controlling so many corpses at once could not be done by any students. Heinz smiled in satisfaction at the praise and nodded. The old man agreed that Kyle was quite lucky to be taught by him. Heinz then looked at the time, recalling he still had something to do. He told Kyle he would leave him there for now and warned him not to enter the furnace or touch any materials and ingredients. Heinz did not want to see Kyle's corpse when he returned and advised him to focus on the books if he did not want to go out. Kyle answered with a stiff smile, promising to be careful. He knew he lacked basic knowledge and certainly would not play around inside the laboratory. As soon as Heinz left, Kyle sighed and looked at the shelf in the corner. He regretted not asking what he should read first. The corners of Kyle's mouth twitched as he randomly picked a book titled Kabbalistic Philosophy and Radical Omens. He had no idea what kind of book it was, but flipped through the pages and confirmed it was written in Sonati. Kyle could read the book, but doubted whether he could understand it. In the end, he placed the book back and tried to find books with titles containing basic, fundamentals, beginner, primary, or other words hinting they were for someone ignorant like him.